Good morning. Welcome back if you've watched any of my other videos. Today I'm going to continue my trek through the book of Genesis. I'll be reading chapters 38 and 39. Yes, 38 and 39. Let's go ahead and get started. So, starting with 38, it's called Judah and Tamar. At the time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hiram. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Alright, so again, not starting out too strong. A lot of the times these genealogy ridden sections tend to be a little bit boring and the names usually trip me up. But these names weren't too shabby today. So Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Well, that's funny. Again, it's odd to me as somebody who lives in the 21st century, and there is incalculable number of people in the sex trafficking trade. An incalculable number of children right now being abused by their parents, locked in some man's basement, screaming and praying for their parents to save them. But oh, God's got time for this one fella here to put to death because he was wicked. Newsflash: the whole world is wicked. I don't know. That stuff just bothers me. It really cripples any faith that I build when I hear God intervenes, but yet He refuses to intervene for the current time frame. Not only that, it kind of jeopardizes the stance of free will. Now, I personally do believe in free will. Like, I can choose to record this. I can choose not to record this. I was actually watching an Alex O'Connor video where he said that free will doesn't exist and it's all genetic. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. It's literally, which is crazy, is because I consider him somebody who is thoughtful and intriguing and intuitive. But when you say things like free will doesn't exist, well, you sound like an idiot. You sound like an idiot because obviously I can choose to do what I do. Duh. But it's all genetically predisposed for him. However, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. For this, when God's going around flooding, killing, all that stuff, is it really free will? Right? Because He's wicked. Everyone's wicked. We all deserve to die. But I don't know. I digress. Let me continue on. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law and to raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep her from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was look wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. So this guy pulls out, doesn't go into her, and God kills him as well. Well, newsflash, there's a lot of people right now who is allowing their bodily fluids reach the ground, tissues, paper towels, clothing articles. No death for them. So that's the stuff that pulls people away from faith. These two things do not make sense. Either it's wicked and you're going to be put to death for it, or it's part of the free will sphere. That's my problem. So, and is God saying it was better for him to put his seed in some woman than to not do so, it's kind of curious, but let's continue on. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. Then Judah had recovered from his grief, when Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah, to the man who was shearing his sheep, and his friend Horah, the Adulamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance of Enaim, which was on the road to Timnah. For she saw that through Shelah she had now grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. No, though Shelah had grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock." He said, "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" She asked. He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" "Your seal is and its cord, and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend to the Adulamite in order to get the pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute there," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute there." So again, that common trend of redundancy. Although I've said this before, or at least I feel like I've said this before, where we tend to judge the past because most of their, I guess you could say, transmission of information came verbally, right? But we today tend to correlate that to the game telephone. Whereas if I tell you my shirt is purple, it's going to be my pants are pink by the time it gets to the end of the line. Right? That's how we kind of equate things. But these are not the same men and women of today. They cannot be held to the same standards of the men and women of today. Because back then, these people would memorize entire passages, entire sections of literary work. So we cannot judge their, I guess you could say, verbal use of translating or relaying a message the way that we would judge somebody today. So it's literally verbatim what that man said. That's all I was trying to say there. Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." Wow. Okay. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law, "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said, and added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah, and he did not sleep with her again." I read that last passage wrong. I'm going to read it one more time. Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. And he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her room. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew his hand back, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you have broken out." And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. All right, so I'm a little confused here. Let me look back through that one more time. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. Got it. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the hand came out of the birth canal first. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it to his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But he drew back his hand, and his brother came out. I don't think that's possible, but okay. All right, moving on. Joseph and Potiphar's wife. I might be pronouncing that one wrong. It's Potiphars. Well, apostrophe S. So now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, excuse me, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of the household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord had blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. Well, that would be great to be, blessed and loved and looked after like this. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the household and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except for the food he ate. Now Joseph was a well-built, handsome, and after a while his master's wife took note. Well-built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns is entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. The master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do such a wicked thing and a sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." What a piece of crap. She left his cloak beside her. She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you bought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master had heard the story his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. So, isn't that lovely? You go to prison and you still have God's favor. Now, obviously, he did nothing wrong. Joseph was honestly the victim in all of these circumstances. including his brother selling him, this now his new master turning on him, which isn't really the master's fault. He has been betrayed by his own wife, and you got to put yourself into historical context. If I'm this wealthy assistant or confidant of the pharaoh, and my wife is telling me that my slave is trying to bed her, essentially, well, I'm going to go with my wife instead of the slave. So contextually, he's not doing anything wrong. He's just trying to defend his household and his wife. But it's the wife that's done something wrong in this situation. So I'm going to call it there today. I hope you all had a great day. I'm sorry about the tangent I had earlier, but that's just truly how I feel when I read this stuff. I just cannot deal with I'm going to kill somebody because they're wicked, but there's a guy with a child in his basement that he goes to every night. And his family's upstairs, none the wiser to the child that he is assaulting. I cannot wrap my head around that. God picks and chooses who's worthy and who's not, and who's wicked and who's not. It's a little contradictory to the God that I've always envisioned. But I'm going to stop ranting now. I hope you all have a wonderful day. God bless.